those not in the know, give us the 20XX convention spiel.
Of course, I've done it so many times at this
I
point.
know, I'm sure.
Uh, 20XX is basically co-op roguelike Mega Man X. So it means, Mega Man X style gameplay, control scheme, but with all the good roguelike elements like randomly generated levels, powers, bosses, stuff like that every time you play, and full multiplayer, either local or online.
I first ran into you guys, I think it was 2013, PAX East. It's the first PAX East I was doing.
It had to have been
It
2014 because
had
we
to have
started
been
making it
2014 now that
summer
I'm thinking about
2013.
it.
Yeah.
So, been a couple years, and it's
Yeah.
been really cool to watch the process. Um, and your
Thanks.
game has changed quite a bit, because when I first ran into you guys, you were Echoes of Iridu.
Right.
So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here is, first up, now that you're really close to launch, um, what does that look like? What does this process look like to you as your first real game you've produced as Batterystaple Games? Now that you're relatively close to the end of the first project.
So are we talking about what does the development process from, the 2014 Echoes of Eridu to here look like, or what is
Yeah.
the journey from here to the end look like, or which segment are we talking about
Well,
here?
let's do both. Let's start with Echoes of Iridu to where you are now, and then what we're looking forward. So, looking backwards,
Oh
what is
man.
that? What does that kind of look like to you?
Pretty much everything about the game has changed since then, right? You still have Ace and Nina, you still have their core identities. The ultimate core vision of the game, which is capturing that awesome, action platformer feel with all of our awesome roguelike elements and the multiplayer. All of that is still completely intact. The core vision of the game hasn't changed, but a lot of the ways we implement it have, right?
Mm.
Like, we have the unlock system in the form of soul nuts, which I'm pretty sure wasn't even in the game then. It's been so long that, like, the idea of unlocking stuff is like so solidly in the game at this point and has been in for so long. But I guess in 2014 it wasn't yet. When we first showcased the game at PAX East 2014, we got to, like, I think February of that year, and we saw that there were still some booths open at East, and we were like, if we really crunch, we have two showable levels, we could show this thing. And in hindsight, it was certainly cool to have gotten all that experience. But anybody whose image of the game is informed by having seen it then, really almost has no idea what we're currently doing because it's so different.
Right.
Like, I'm pretty sure every single art asset in the game has been redone. I think it's actually every single asset. Like, I don't know if...
Wow.
I'm trying to think if a single asset still exists from that early build. If anything, that was really more of a proof of concept or a prototype than anything else. When we did that, we launched a Kickstarter at the same time, but, like, the thing that we launched a Kickstarter for was even so much smaller in scope than sort of what it turned out to be. It's just,
Right.
over the last 2 years or so, every time we hit a major milestone, we get, an influx of players, a whole bunch of new people interested in the game, and every time that happens, we sort of realize, hey, if we did X, Y, and Z, we could really make this thing, we really take it up a level, and really make this, that much more meaningful or impressive or what have you. And that's just happened so many times at this point that we've sort of eventually redone, everything. So it happened, once when we brought on Clemens Scott in 2015 from Broken Rules in Austria
Mm.
to help us sort of, like, polish up a lot of our visuals. It happened another time, I guess, when we added casual, when we redid the characters, when we revamped all 8 of our bosses in the last, couple of patches, or I guess couple of months at this point.
Mm.
When we took a hard look at our level design, we were like, we've learned so much about how to do this right since we did it the first time that, like, what's in here now is kind of primitive. Just like a lot of sort of simple playability rules that we'd kind of violated or ignored that we really could, do much better with. Just so much of the game that we've sort of redone from the ground up. We even had I think we still had the loadout system way back in 2014 where you, like, chose sort of a setup before you started a run,
Right.
which probably sounds cool to anybody listening, but was just so against, like, what we saw as the core Mega Man roguelike gameplay that we just, eventually scrapped it entirely. I don't know. Everything has changed, man.
What do you think is the? I mean, probably it's pretty hard for you to narrow it down, but is there one change, kind of on like a larger scale, that stands out to you as kind of like the most significant, or the one that had the most impact on the development process?
That's a great question. If I were to say, I think I might choose one change instead that had the biggest impact on sort of the player base's perception of the game.
Yeah, yeah.
If I can go that way, and it's
Oh,
not even,
absolutely.
So one way, the simple, obvious answer is just the fact that we literally revamped all of the visuals, and that's going to change anybody's viewpoint. But from a more meaningful perspective, back in, I want to say it was February of this year. It might be earlier than that. Maybe it's November. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at all my change logs. When we introduced the Core AUG system, which sort of it functions a little bit like the Mega Man X game, like armor parts systems, where you can find pieces of different armors and they all have different impacts on you. We introduced those 4 sets that all have sort of different themes behind them and do different stuff, and you can mix and match them depending on what you find in a run. Obviously, it's a roguelike, so you never know what you're going to find in a run.
Right.
When we introduced that system, we sort of added this level of wonder to the player experience, because as soon as you grab a piece of one of those things, your player visual changes. It has a set name attached to it. Like the player, it immediately gets the gears in the player's mind turning and saying, like, hey, not only do I wonder like exactly what this thing I just did or picked up does, which he thinks about everything he picks up, but additionally he suddenly got this like one slot filled with a set item, and he's like, wait, there's a bunch of other pieces that go with this guy, and wait, there might be other sets entirely that go by themselves. And basically, like, the first time he picks that up, he's like, what world have I just gotten a tiny glimpse into? Because all the sets also do these like crazy fantastic things that are all like kind of broken on purpose. Like, the idea behind each one is that they should make one aspect of the game so much easier. Like, for example, the Oxjack set, which is the sort of like dashing or mobility set, makes it so that if you complete the set, you can air dash indefinitely. So you almost have just like permanent horizontal flight, since air dashing also limits your vertical movement.
Right.
So a lot of the game's platforming challenges, as long as you can air dash and sort of maintain a sort of like relative stability there and don't go too fast and bump into stuff, kind of negates a lot of the platforming challenges of the game. Similarly, like the Dracopint set, makes it so every single one of your attacks is now a charge attack. And especially if you're Nina and you're just spamming charge shots all over the place for the rest of the game, it tends to make a lot of the combat a lot easier. And it's the kind of thing that feels really, really busted the first time you complete a set. You're like, holy shit, this is awesome. I'm so overpowered. But like with the Dracopin set, you're not immune to platforming. You're not immune to spikes, and you can't shoot spikes to death. So there's still very difficult elements of the late game that can totally bone you if you're not prepared for them, or like, mis-execute or whatever like that. And the same thing is true of the Armatort set, which just nullifies every hazard, but doesn't inherently make you stronger in combat, other than the arms, which let you negate enemy shots. So it's like a very defensive set, but you still have to like fight your way through everything.
Right.
I think that individual change, that addition, it really brought different layers to the game's augment system that didn't exist before. And I think to me that's probably the one most major change that we made from a gameplay perspective, other than obviously like literally everything else we've changed,
Right.
which is a lot of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that one, because that's what stood out to me when we were doing our Friday stream and I was playing 20XX last week. I hadn't been playing 20XX anytime recently, and
right, we
that
bumped into
stuck
each
out
other
to
at
me.
East this year, but we hadn't really like played it in a long time. Yeah,
And I mean, when I first ran across the I think it was the Dracakin boots that let you double jump,
yeah.
I was just like, oh my goodness, I need to find enough nuts to afford this thing and then backtrack across the level.
Right.
It adds a really cool, level of having to collect that set, having to, experiment with it. So what does it look like moving forward for you towards launch and then after launch?
So there are a couple of big ticket items still on our list before launch, right? There are a couple of things that are on the list that we are happy to unconditionally promise, because we know that we are never going to go to 1.0 without those things. And those are the game's, so first and foremost, the game's final level, level 9, which is going to have its own, set of challenges, its own boss encounter or encounters, and, sort of give that run its proper capstone to a 20XX run instead of just finishing a level. We are in the middle of our big level design overhaul, involving a lot of changes to existing pieces, involving a lot of additions to new pieces. We are very close to the end of our set of boss reworks, so we basically went through all of the stage bosses, all 8 of them. Some of them received, sort of more minor balance and fun changes. Some of them received complete overhauls. Actually, most of them received complete overhauls, while usually still retaining their identity. We're close to the end of that, but there's still one to go. And he should come in next patch, which is today's Monday, right? So next patch is in 9 days. Should come in then, not 100%, but he probably will. So let's see, the boss reworks, level design stuff, level 9. There's obviously like a ton of polish, a ton of fixing.
Of course, yeah.
Netplay specifically still needs some stability work. There are a couple of weird bugs that sometimes happen there that mess people's business up. But other than that, we're sort of in the the second 90% in terms of polish, and then it's just a matter of getting the game to where we want it to be, and probably adding a bunch of small features in still, but nothing that's like such a big ticket on the promised list sort of thing. And that's kind of 1.0. After 1.0 is kind of a whole new world, honestly. It depends a lot on how we do. It depends a lot on sales. It depends a lot on how long it takes us to... So we're currently looking into... This is also not a promise. We're sort of just starting to look into what it's going to take to port the game to PS4 and to Xbox One and that good stuff. Like maybe Mac and Linux as well, sort of depending on market analysis. Like, do we think there's a big enough market that we have untapped here to make it worth porting? Let's find out. Depending on how all that stuff goes, we'd love to build additional content. We'd love for bosses to each have their own theme instead of there being like 4 themes or 2 bosses share each one. A lot of stuff like that. New characters, all the good stuff. The typical, post-release stuff. I think the biggest unique thing we're thinking about doing post-release is... It's not quite workshop integration. That might not be the right way to put it. Steam Workshop lets some games have users like develop their own stuff for it, their own mods. We want to do something like that, but exactly the way we're going to implement that isn't totally nailed down yet. The goal is for players to be able to make their own level segments, level pieces. So we have to make that like an easy thing for people to do. We'll have to develop a level editor. We'll have to have some kind of system that, can check people's, level pieces and validate them and make sure they work properly and stuff like that. The sort of pie in the sky that we could have a system that is able to pull popular user-made pieces at game runtime.
Oh, cool.
So that they would sort of like, if a user piece had been played and reviewed highly enough, the game would sort of trust it, much in the same way it trusts the pieces that I've made myself. Such that a user sitting down and just like playing a random run can actually have, really infinite level generation at his fingertips, because it's not only me, but it's whoever's passionate in the community making chunks too, which would be super, super cool.
That'd be an
but
awesome
it's not
addition.
Yeah, I really, really, really want to do it, but I sort of have to keep my head down, focus on 1.0 first,
Right.
make sure the core game gets out. It's the kind of thing where like a first-time player doesn't really care about a system like that. It's an awesome feature for the game's longevity, and it's an awesome thing to keep your veterans playing after a long time. But a very, very first-time user who's like playing for the first hour to decide whether or not they like the game, isn't even going to notice that. It probably won't even be enabled for time users. So it's one of those things where like we really have to make sure that everything about that core game experience is right first, before we can start tackling something like that. So that's why it's a post 1.0 thing, but there's so much I'd love to do there, and obviously in the world of programming, anything is possible. It's just a question of, how long is it going to take, how reliably can I do it? Because, when you start talking about something like that, there's potentially a lot of like, networked database stuff happening. There could be, depending on how far Steam Workshop can take me, that could mean, external database servers, that could mean 20XX would talk to, a server that I control, which, that I have an internet-facing server that my game is dealing with. And I have to worry about a lot of security issues and stuff like that. And I can see a lot of potential work that's going to open me up to needing to do. So I just, I want to make sure I understand exactly what the scope of that project is before I start, like, really promising anything.
Sure.
Anyway, that's the biggest thing I want to do after 1.0.
Well, that sounds really cool. Shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah.
There's kind of an elephant in the room with 20XX, especially recently, where you guys
Sure.
were up against another game that was kind of billing itself as a homage to Mega Man.
What? There's another Mega Man inspired game coming out?
What? No. Of course, I'm talking about talking about Mighty Number Nine.
Of
I'm
course.
not gonna ask your opinion of it. That's not kind of what we want to do. But I
Good,
am
because I
in.
haven't actually dug into it yet anyway.
Oh, there you go. um, I am interested to know if you've seen that release have an effect on the 20XX community or its sales or interest, something like that. If you've seen any sort of kind of, I don't know what maybe the right word is like wake.
An uptick or an
Yeah,
infect
yeah. I'm
or
just
an
introduced to see
influence or
how two
right. Can I
games coming
tell?
out that are very
Right. Can I
similar.
see any correlation between Mighty Number Nine's release and media blitz and the apparent interest in 20XX?
Yes, yeah.
So it certainly has been a very good month for us, but June in general has been a very solid month for us. Well before Mighty Number Nine actually came out on the 21st. We ran as part of our first participation in Steam's week-long deals early in the month. And that was very, very good to us. The Steam Summer Sale has also been very good to us. The Steam Summer Sale started, what was it? Was it 2 days? I think it was 2 days after the Mighty Number Nine launch.
Yeah.
So, like, in our sales data, in our, page hits and all that stuff, like, there's a little bit of potential, like, conflation of factors going on there that makes us a little bit uncertain what's causing what. We certainly have seen a number of people on our Steam community and who are posting in our Steam reviews and who are posting in Mighty Number Nine Steam reviews, directly comparing the games and saying, you should probably go check out 20XX if you're not happy with what's going on here, which of course we're like super delighted to see. Like, that obviously makes us very happy. That's a great thing for us. So while Mighty Number Nine has almost certainly had their launch and everything like that, it's almost certainly had a good effect on us. Whether it's due to their launch issues or not is a little bit less certain. Like,
Sure.
on one hand, this game isn't living up to my expectations. What can I find to fill that void is certainly like a compelling story. But if it had been phenomenal, I just enjoyed this amazing game, and now because of this amazing game, I'm super hyped up on the genre. What else can I, sort of gobble up next would also be a very compelling story. So I think that would have been, about as good for us. Probably not more, but, it would have been a very nice thing too.
Sure. So moving from that, I'd like to talk a little bit more, just kind of get a window into you as a developer. So how did
Sure.
you personally get into indie game development?
Well, so, I grew up playing NES.
Mm.
I even grew up making my own little, like, pen and paper style RPGs. I never would have called them that then, of course.
Mm.
It was just me writing down rule sets and then making my friends play with them. When I was a little boy, I'm talking like, probably starting around age 5 or so, I started doing this. And then at recess, we would hang out on the playground and be the super cool kids who are playing this game that Chris made up. No, I've wanted to make games ever since I was a little boy. I grew up playing NES and literally everything else from then on. I was definitely a Nintendo kid. And then, I went to undergrad for computer science, and I finished that. So I knew how to program. I got out of college actually, and I wanted to make video games right out of college, but I didn't really develop much of a sense of ambition for myself until I was in my early 20s. So I'd gotten out of college, and instead of spending college, sort of building a developer portfolio, like in tandem with my programming skills, I had instead spent college, drinking a lot and playing World of Warcraft. So I, got out of that, didn't have a huge portfolio to show for it, and, sent my resume around to a bunch of games companies, both big and medium sized. I don't know if I don't think when I got out of college there were too many like actual indie studios hiring. This was 2007, just as sort of the indie thing started to kick off. So after that, I basically went and got a job working for a telecom services company for several years. Then I worked for a cybersecurity company for a while. And suddenly I was in my late 20s and I had some money saved up and I didn't have a wife or kids and figured, well, if I'm going to try and make games on my own, now's the time. And basically quit my, safe cybersecurity job and started prototyping this ugly as sin programmer art Mega Man style game. And slowly but surely, tiny iteration after tiny iteration after tiny iteration, and 3 years, and here we are.
Awesome. Final two questions are something we like to ask everybody we interview.
Yep.
To get a sense of who you are as a gamer and then kind of build the community. So first is, what other games have you been playing, or do you play like pretty regularly?
Man, lately I have been a terrible indie developer. I have been playing League of Legends. I have been playing Hearthstone. I have been playing a lot of Overwatch.
Yep.
I've basically been playing enormous games that millions of people are playing. I even started playing Diablo 3 again for a little while. No, I've been a terrible indie. Let's see, what else have I
I think
played too
Overwatch
much
pretty
of
much
recently?
swallowed everyone though when it came
Yeah,
out.
no, it absolutely swallowed me. It came out, I was like, am I going to buy it? And then I looked, because I had the Overwatch beta in my Battle.net launcher, and I clicked on it, and it was like 24 friends are playing Overwatch. I was like, well, all right,
Yep,
here we go.
that sounds quite familiar to me.
Yeah, this is what everybody I know is going to be playing for the next at least month or so. So, whatever, fine, I'll do it. It's totally worth it. Overwatch is great.
Oh, it's great. What's the hero you play most?
Usually when I'm on defense, if I'm, not needed to play a tank or support, I'm probably playing Junkrat. On offense, I'm probably playing Soldier or Reaper, and if I'm playing support, it's usually Lucio on offense, Mercy on defense, usually Reinhardt for tanking either way. Diva if my opponent has a super strong Widowmaker that is just taking a dump on my team. Just very satisfying to use her dash move to just get right into Widow's face and
Right
destroy
into
her.
her face, just fly up there.
Yeah, exactly. Fly directly into her and then click on her until she's dead.
Right. So finally, is there another indie developer or team out there that you think is doing something really cool that you would suggest people check out?
Well, there's one that comes to mind recently because I checked in on him and his team's game very recently for the first time in several months. Have you ever either played or talked to the guy making a game called Vagante?
Yes, I've talked to him. I've played a very little bit of Vagante. But yeah, we have talked to that.
You gotta play more of it. It's really good. They've been doing some pretty sweet stuff lately too. I first met them. They showed at MagFest alongside us a couple years back, and then we were both in I guess it was the East 2015 Mega Booth for the first time together. Yeah, that's definitely one that I've been playing with a little bit more recently.
Well, awesome.
But you've already talked to him, so then it's maybe less interesting.
No, it's good. We like to. It's been really interesting since we've kind of made a point to ask anybody we interview that question. You start seeing the webs of all the developers and who's talking to who and where things are connected. It's kind of it's an inside look at the community, which is kind of cool to see. So that's exactly what we're looking for. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us, Chris.
Of course, man.
Best of luck.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, of course. So best of luck with 20XX as it moves closer to launch, and keep us in the loop.